Greetings again to all of you gathered here with us at HDS on the campus. I'm pleased now to welcome those of you who are joining us through the live webcast to our event as well. Welcome. The wonders of technology allow you to be present with us as well. I hope that you are also feeling the electricity and excitement in the room as we are. Whether you're watching from your home, from a coffee shop, or you're sitting on a park bench in this awesome day watching on your smartphone, or dare I say, watching from your office. I'm Julia Whitcavitch-DeVoy, MTS 94. I'm the chairperson of the Alumni Council this year. And it was my honor, it was my deep honor to present the Gomes Honors to 5 remarkable recipients just a few minutes ago upstairs in the Andover Chapel. It was unbelievably moving. And now we are going to get to hear from each of our honorees in a special installment of our Divinity Dialogues, which is our Alumni Distinguished Speaker Series that's been hosted by the Alumni Council for the past couple of years. But first, though, I'd like to welcome to the podium one member of our honoree cohort who is not himself an HGS graduate, although we still love him, we still like him. Bill Graham. AM 70, PhD 73. He was dean for the past decade, and for most of his time, I was a member of Alumni Council for an enormous portion of it, and I was just humbled by his excellent, transformative leadership here, his genuine care for the Divinity School. Bill, thank you so much for your dedicated service to Harvard Divinity School, and congratulations again on receiving the Gomes Honor. And the podium is now yours.
Well, after hearing me for 10 years, I can assure you I'm going to be mercifully brief today. It's really a tremendous honor for me. I think to be recognized by the alumni of this institution is something very, very special. I came to know just how special this alumni group is in the course of my 10 years here as dean. And it's wonderful to continue to be on the faculty here now. I was not on the faculty before coming over as dean from across the fence here. And it's been wonderful to continue now and to be with my colleagues here. But there's something very special as I came to know as I traveled around and met with alumni and gave out some awards myself. The alumni group here is simply extraordinary. And I think the 4 real honorees today that you're going to hear from are a good example of that. And I'm really humbled as well as honored to be a part of a group like this. I think that for me, and even I find in my study of other religious traditions, I find that the actualization of religion is really, to my mind, in social action and social conscience. And that's true around the world as far as I'm concerned. And I think the group today, I'm the 5th wheel here today in a very happy way. The 4 main wheels here, I think as you'll hear, and as you've already heard if you were upstairs, are people working in very different sectors, but always working, as so many of our graduates do from this institution, to make the world a better place and to care for those who often can't care for themselves. And to me, that is the highest thing that one can do in this life. So I'm extremely honored to be a part of this. And let me finally say, I'm also very honored to be receiving an award with the name of my longtime and dear friend Peter Gomes on it. Peter and I first met when he was a middler MDiv here in 1966, I think it was, and I was starting a PhD program. He was as much a colorful character then as he remained all of his life. But I think the thing about Peter that is most significant is that Peter always, I always like to say, was on the side of the angels. Peter always, when the chips were down and there was a cause that needed someone with great visibility and, one time really unique eloquence, Peter would step in and be that person. He did that any number of times here at Harvard, whether it was on racial issues, whether it was on issues of recognizing the gay community within the university here, whatever it was, Peter was there. He put his money really where his mouth was in terms of his time and his effort and his presence. And so it, I think, is fitting that a group of people such as are on the podium here are being honored today. And as I say, I'm really touched to be even associated with the four of you. Thank you.
I'd like to add that Divinity Dialogues was created by the Alumni Council way back in 2012, so we have a very long 2-year history. But it was created to give our alumni a platform to share their personal and their vocational stories with us. And as graduates, you know that Harvard Divinity School students love stories. And we love the stories of our life together here at HDS. And we also of our individual stories and how these individual stories are woven together to form our communal story. And today we will hear from our 2014 cohort of alumni to receive the Gomes honor. Each honoree will tell us briefly about his or her special, incredible journey and how his or her Harvard Divinity School education may have been a guide along the way. And Sarah Taylor Peck, our awesome Alumni Council Vice Chairperson, and I will co-moderate the discussion. And let's begin with Eileen.
So thank you so much, and let me just start by saying what an honor it is to be included in a celebration of Peter Gomes, who for me was an example of someone who made manifest the complexity of the human personality. As a character, he was so difficult to pigeonhole or define in a simple category. And I find there's something so uplifting about that when someone shows that multifaceted, complex, even mysterious, human character. Ironically, it seems like it's only when a person shows that multifaceted, even seemingly contradictory nature that they become for us models of authenticity and integrity. And it's a strange combination, but true, certainly in his case. To the question of, what was the role of Harvard Divinity School as part of my experience and how it launched me on my journey, I would say, first off, my path has been anything but linear. I have had the kind of experience over the 3 decades since I left Harvard Divinity School that really can't be replicated, and yet I would say for me it all hangs together. So I've spent a lot of time as a scholar. I've obviously studied theology, ethics, philosophy, law, East Asian studies. I lived in China. Studied the rule of law in China. I've been a scholar at Stanford, and I was a litigator for a time, which is important in terms of developing advocacy skills and fighting skills. And I've also had the opportunity to be a diplomat and now a human rights advocate. And as I say, it doesn't necessarily, many people have said, how do you have this all hang together? But I really do feel like it's part of a whole. And many of the roots of my journey, I can say, I point back to my experience at Harvard Divinity School. It was a very foundational time. And the 3 things that I would point to as dominant strands in my experience here were first and foremost cultivation of a deep sense of just the freedom to explore intellectually as far as needed without fear. Second, respect for social justice work that I really hadn't been exposed to prior to my experience here. And third, respect for a type of knowing that only can be grasped by the heart. And it was the combination of those 3 things that characterized my experience here. On the first dimension, fearless intellectual exploration, I have to mention Professor Gordon Kaufman, who, as many of you know, was a very dominant figure at Harvard Divinity School in those years. And he taught a number of classes, but the one that I remember in particular was one where we were required to articulate a contemporary, postmodern notion of God, and sort of like the biggest of the big questions. And I cannot say that I came up with a final, complete answer, but I will say what was important about it was that sense of freedom to explore to the absolute limit of my own ability those kinds of questions. And I think that being required to write about it and talk about it developed an ability to articulate arguments that have served me very well. So that was a really dominant strand of my experience. Second, I would say on the exposure to social justice, it was really my classmates who were such good examples to me of what it looks like when someone is willing to take a risk and engage in work where they might be giving up prestige and power, money, whatever, to care about victims and to make a difference in the world. And I remember one particular classmate who had been a very successful lawyer who came to Harvard Divinity School to be an advocate for the homeless. And he left a lot beyond, but he just stood out as a really impressive character and made a big impression on me. And then last but not least, perhaps most personally, was in terms of the knowing of the heart and that influence, was Guy Martin, who was Dean of Students at the time and also taught what was for me a very important couple of classes on religion and the literary imagination. And it just gave me access to a kind of knowing that rang true in a way that the intellectual could not do and even the fighting for justice could not do. It was a different type of truth. And of all of them, I would say, that was even the biggest impact. And last, I will close by saying, I've now come to this place where it appears that my life is very coherent. I was a human rights diplomat, and now I'm a human rights advocate, and that's great. But the freedom to explore different paths along the way, trust your instinct, be true to yourself, rather than doing what appears to be the correct next step. I certainly never did that, and I am confident I would have never ended up where I belong had I done so. And I think the influence here helped me do that.
Thank you very much, Eileen. We'll next hear from Simone Xavier Guerrand-Hermès, MTS 1993.
Well, first, it sounds that my name is so long. It's not really true, but my grandfather became so illustrious that we all decided to add to our first name his second name. So, because Hermès is better known than Guerrand. Even though it's not a Greek god or anything like that, it's more on a material basis than anything else. But my grandfather was a very devoted Huguenot Protestant, and when we went with him, there was no way to escape going on Sunday church. That was impossible. And even when we went to see him in his beautiful house in the south of France, we were there from age 7 to, we all had every Sunday to attend it. We thought we had other things we would have liked to do at the time, but there was no choice. And in fact, I went to see my mother when I was about 12 or 13 and said to her that I was interested and would like maybe to become a minister. And she looked at me very stern and says, "You have much better things to do. Once you're on your own, and then you can decide, not before." End of the quote. And of course, I had no choice. I did my schooling, and went to a different school. Harvard was one of the great time in my life. But the thing is that the family was Huguenot, and it may not sound strange, but there was such a divide between other Catholics or others that the Protestant Huguenots, very often they were merchants, they were people successful, and basically they were looked upon by Catholicism when I was young, it changed enormously, as being those hardworking people, but they are not fun, they are not interesting, and they better stay on their own. And it was very strange because, in fact, I have a twin brother who looks exactly like me, so if you ever meet him, even if you say hello, he doesn't recognize you, don't be worried. It's not me, it's him. Sometimes it's a good escape. So my mother in this was very clear that if I was interested to be involved in religion, then I needed to prove that I was successful. I needed to have done things so that I could really be then doing what I wanted. And I was able to go for, maybe I was probably 15, to go with some Protestant monks in the south of France, because in fact one of my aunt had been saved by them. And so I went to see there, and I discovered Protestant monks that they had such an opening, such a way to look at life and at people, that it affected me probably more than anything else to decide that I should be involved. But in view of my mother's sayings, I started by working for a firm where I don't know if religion is very strong, called Goldman Sachs. And then I went to something which wasn't not that religious, called Emmanuel Dijon. I made some money, so I was very happy. And basically, it's in coming back in France that I met with my grandfather, and who says, but so, because he took us every Sunday to church. So what have you been doing while you were away? Are you still continuing church? And I had to admit that I had not been as good as he hoped, but that in fact I was truly not only a Christian, but believed, for me, what was most important, that not only God exists, but the key of getting close to it is to develop your consciousness. And developing consciousness is something that is difficult probably to explain, but probably is where mystics or others have developed a true understanding at the reality that is beyond ourselves and yet present. And I had then the good fortune to decide that I wanted also to create a foundation for peace. And I've met extraordinary people in my life, people who had been at wars, people who had fights with others, who were willing to spend time. And I have a large house in Morocco, and I've organized maybe between 12 to 15 different meetings with different religions. And I have learned enormously from how one perceives the other. In fact, perception is a key to all of us to get further into people, and that perception is that you think they're this way and this way. And when you get involved into deep part of themselves, you find out that we all have same needs, same many ways to look at things, but in fact also an understanding that we also here to help others, to bring something that makes a difference for others. And I think this is the key. So when I started to create that foundation, I was able to find a few people. One of them came from Harvard and been extremely important, called Patrice Brodeur. I don't know if any of you remembers him or know him, but he's been doing a lot of things. He's now at the head of something called CAICID. CAICID, there's him and a lady. CAICID is an extraordinary amount of money given by King Abdullah, 2 times 25 million euro, a little money for him, to help in the process and of bringing of the fact that Islam is also a religion. And so in Caiceid, which is in Vienna, if you ever are in Vienna, you should go and see it. It's very impressive. There are about 60 people who are involved in trying to bring, they're doing a lot of writing for the moment, but they are going to be more open. How do we create a world where intolerance and acceptation of the others has to become a reality? And it's truer today than it was before, because I think things have opened. The world is no longer the same world, and people are involved in many more things and understand that helping others, being attentive, is also a source of gratification for oneself. So in this, I decided then to create the Foundation for Peace. And one of the key issues there is related to what I have said, is forgiveness. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to forget. Forgiveness is that you have the capacity to let go of the hurts, to let go of the fact that, yes, so rather than the continuances of he or her says, he has done me the worst and this and that, and all their life speaking about it, or him saying she was terrible and all his life talking about it. In fact, when they do that, they live with this issue till the end of their life. So they haven't grown, they haven't learned. And the issue, I think, is most important is, at least for me and maybe for all of us, to learn as to where you can make a difference in the understanding of others and yourself. So basically, the aim of the foundation was to try to bring this feeling, and especially the forgiveness. Well, I don't want to extend too much, but basically, it's been a source of real, not only for me, transformation, but of gratification and far more. In small things, in big one, and I can only recommend, look at the others and you'll find yourself.
Thank you, Simone. We will now hear from Elizabeth Eaton, MDiv 80.
Thank you. This is an honor and a surprise for me, actually. I think there were some faculty here who weren't sure I was going to graduate with an MDiv. We had to hunt down Helmut Kester for a final grade for my paper at the end of a semester, so that was interesting. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, a Lutheran on my mother's side, her family since the Reformation. And for us, Harvard was this exotic place. And when my family and my church found out I was going here, mostly members of my congregation, they were afraid I would lose my way in the godless liberalism of Harvard. And so the first time I came to the Brown Room for a tea and they were serving sherry, I knew that they were right. Now, their worst fears were confirmed. It was a wonderful experience, and pretty soon I was introduced to this marvelous character, Peter Gomes, and I heard stories about Peter from other faculty members, that the faculty would gather and retreat before the term would begin, and they would engage in some hymn singing and start with, Bach cantata arrangements of hymns, and then maybe move to the Wesley Brothers, until finally Peter would take over and sing, "There Ain't No Fleas on the Lamb of God," and then they knew they were ready to go for the year. And he was also reputed to have baptized people, I think, in Fresh Pond while wearing Harvard sweats. I think that was a really wonderful thing. This was a great experience for me, coming from the Midwest and coming from what at that time in my religious tradition was a pretty insular parochial group. I lived at Divinity Hall for my first year and did pots and pans at the Rock. That was my job. But I was really low on the room lottery at Div Hall, where apparently Ralph Waldo Emerson was reputed to have been the dorm proctor one year. Not my year, I'm not that old, but So we had this wonderful consortium, which I think still exists, where the divinity schools in this area could cross-register. And I was able then to live over at the Episcopal Divinity School, where I met my dear husband, Conrad, who is an alum there, and then begin to understand that Episcopalians are not just slightly lower church Presbyterians. I had no idea. And that, in a real way, was the huge value of a Harvard Divinity School education. My denomination was very suspicious of those of us who did not go to Lutheran seminaries. And the further you get away from Minnesota, the more suspicious they get. So when I came here, we certainly had a Lutheran critical mass. Krister Stendahl was the dean of the school at the time. Paul Hansen, Helmut Kester were on staff. Henry Horn was the senior pastor at University Lutheran, who was in fact taught us, we call it symbolics or Lutheran confessions. We had a large group of students there. So we were pretty well taken care of, and we were advised if we even had a footnote citing of something Lutheran, send it back to our candidacy committees so they would know that we were on the level here. They never trusted that, though. But for me, what was so critically important was to realize that there was a whole world beyond my one tiny part of the Lutheran family. This is before the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America came to being. So we were, at that time, 4 separate main flavors of Lutheran, one of whom has never joined with the rest of us. So when I got here, no one was asking, why are you Lutheran Church in America as opposed to American Lutheran Church? No one cared about that. The question here was, why do you believe anything at all? Yeah. And so and then you would have to become an apologist. And as Simone said, you had to develop this consciousness about why that was important and if it was in fact true. And then once that was established, why Christianity as opposed to other religious traditions and interreligious traditions? I mean, I had a roommate on an archaeology seminar, Sarah Tanzer, who was a PhD candidate in New Testament studies, Jewish. And I met this one guy, he was a Japanese Buddhist who just loved onion pizza at the Three Aces. I don't know if that's still open off of Harvard Square. So then you would have dialogue with people who also had developed a consciousness and also found some richness in their own particular religious tradition. And why was your religious tradition, what did that mean to you, and what could that mean to the other? And how did their religious tradition influence and inform and grow your own? And then once we got through that, as a Christian, why aren't you Orthodox or Roman Catholic or the wide variety of Protestant that were involved? Though Lutherans were not really, we were the protesters, but we're not part of the Protestant majority anymore. We like to say that to make ourselves feel better. And then we would have these discussions, and maybe amongst ourselves we might argue about ALC, LCA, AELC, LCMS. Those are the vegetable soup of us. That has been incredibly important for me in my service to God through our denomination. Certainly in our marriage, my husband is an Episcopal priest. In our own family, my cousin's Unitarian. We've got Roman Catholics in the family. We're all over the spectrum. But also in work in the parish, work as a synod bishop, and then work now on this, for 5 months now, on this more national, international scale. Edwin Friedman, who's done a lot of work on systems theory, says that in order to really engage in an authentic relationship with another, you have to be well differentiated. And so if one has no understanding of who one is and is not well defined, it is impossible to have an authentic, honest engagement with another. And so for me, Harvard Divinity School helped me to do that while not insisting that ours was the only way to understand God, or for the Christian tradition to understand God's redeeming love in Jesus Christ, which is not to say we're going to the least common denominator. In fact, Harvard Divinity School taught me not to go that way, but rather by being having a clearer understanding of who I am and how I understand God in action as a Lutheran Christian has made it more possible for me to engage with other Christian traditions as well as other world religious traditions. And at this point, I would say in our societies, and I'll speak for the Americans, you're off the hook on this one. We're at a time in our nation's history, I believe, where xenophobia is accepted again. where we sort of sort ourselves out into like-minded people, which could cross the denominational lines, but where we just sort of gather with people who agree with us instead of saying, I don't agree with you, but I will engage with you, not only hoping to explain myself to you, but with the hope that I might be changed by what I encounter with you. So that kind of engagement, while being certain about who we are, but with humility, is critically important for our culture right now. My denomination, it was one of privilege, not as much the Episcopalians. Honey, you guys always did better. I think most of our people work for your people, but we're bigger. But we were a denomination of privilege. We were part of the mainline Protestant movement in this country, and saw this remarkable spike after the Second World War, where it was one's civic duty to be a part of a religious community. That's in fact when One Nation Under God was added to our pledge. In God We Trust was added to our currency. And that now is gone from us. And I think it's a good thing. I'm not sure Constantine did us a lot of favors. But now, how do we then become more engaged in understanding and appreciating our own religious tradition and having a well-differentiated self-definition of ourselves in order to engage in others, and with humility to become missionaries again? In my denomination, they want me to have a vision. Everyone has to have a vision when you get elected. But I want our folks, first of all, to understand we're the church. Yes, social engagement is absolutely critical. I think you can't separate that from the gospel. But apart from this consciousness developing that, we could be the American Cancer Society or an NGO. So how do we blend those parts together? And then at the same time, how are we aware of our tradition, which will help us to have a better and deeper conversation with other traditions? How are we church together instead of the American disease of individualism, which is a cult? It's almost idolatrous in this country. And then how do we understand that we're church for the sake of the world? So that is all things that were informed and formed in me at HDS, in spite of all the attempts by my denomination to try to find the kernel of heresy that was involved. Here I am. So way to go, Harvard Divinity School.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And now, Peter Isely, MDiv 88.
It's probably dangerous of me to give a biblical reflection with so many biblical scholars probably in this room, but I'm going to venture it anyways. I'm a Catholic, so I can make biblical mistakes. There's a story in Mark's Gospel that many of you are familiar with and have preached upon, Mark 5, of the healing of Jairus' daughter. Jairus, the leader in the community at that time, a Jewish leader in the synagogue. And he begs Jesus to come and see his young daughter and heal her. People have already told Jairus that his daughter's gone. And Jesus accepts this call, this assignment. And as he's on his way to the house, Jairus' house, and a crowd is gathering around Jesus, pushing and shoving, a woman comes up behind him. And according to the gospel accounts, she has been afflicted by bleeding, interminable bleeding for 12 years. She has seen many doctors and physicians, and she's only gotten worse. And she reaches out to touch the hem of Jesus. And everything stops. And Jesus turns around and asks, "Who touched me?" Because Jesus asked that question, it is God's question. When I was a boy, I was touched by a Roman Catholic priest. It's only when I came to this school that was my sanctuary and my home for 3 years, that for the first time in my life, I asked that question: who touched me? In my work with victim survivors, I have learned that it is not faith that brings us together, but it is our loss of faith, and that we must be faithful to that loss. Catholics often tell me, as we're flyering at parishes, about a priest, sex offender that's been in that parish that the archdiocese or the bishop, archbishop or the cardinal has not told them about, as we're reaching out to other victim survivors. The thing I most often hear from my fellow Catholics is, I've not lost my faith. This has not made me lose my faith. And what I like to say to them is, it's terrific that you have succeeded where Christ had failed. It's a famous book, of course, by Bertrand Russell, Why I Am Not a Christian, and I'm going to share with you why I am a Christian. Because losing your faith is not a problem in Christianity. In fact, I would argue that it is one's baptism into Christianity. Christ lost his faith, utterly and completely. St. Paul tells us that faith is a great thing. And he tells us that hope is a great thing. But it's only love that matters. And don't make any mistake about this horror that has engulfed my church and your churches and synagogues. This is a failure of love. I'm so honored to be here today. I was convinced a mistake was made. My name is Isely. It's often spelled Isley. I was convinced that a mistake was made. I want all of us, and I challenge you today with me, to own that question of Jesus, of who touched our churches, to own and take up that question. Emerson, because everybody's got to quote Emerson, apparently, when they're here. And he's been everywhere, too. Oh, Emerson picked up that spoon over there. Emerson. And he would find that very amusing, because didn't you kick him out of here for like 30 years? And then when you came back, it's like, let's name every building after him. One of my favorite quotes of Emerson's, and I never read him when I was here. I never read him. And I began reading him when I left, and have not stopped reading him since. He's always at my bedside. One of my favorite quotes from him is, God put a crack into everything he made. God put that question and put a question into everything that he or she made. And we are that question. So to me, the absence of God, the loss of faith, is the question that we must hang on to. Alain Badiou, the great French philosopher, who I'm sure many of you are struggling and reading with right now, said, and I love this quote, he said, "Do not give up on that part of yourself which you do not know." That is what trauma is about. It may be what we will never know, but let us not give up on that part of our church that we do not know, that we do not want to know. Plato, I don't know if he said this, but I'll improve on him if he didn't. He said there are three great human passions: love, hate, and ignorance. And ignorance is by far the greatest of human passions. My church has a passion to be ignorant about what it has done. The last funeral I went to of a survivor in Milwaukee, not too long ago, his family called me. I had never had a chance, or our group of victim survivors, to meet with him. He had killed himself. There were three brothers that were sexually assaulted by Father Effinger in Milwaukee, one of the many serial predators in the Milwaukee Archdiocese, and Michael's brother called me to come to his funeral. Michael had gone to his mother's grave on a Saturday morning. And the sexton had seen him at the grave site. And he was there for several hours. He had brought his grandfather's shotgun with him. And he killed himself on his mother's grave, trying to be reborn again. I think you know the passage that I'm referring to. The only way to identify Michael, because he had no identification with him, he had one card with him in his pocket. It's from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. He had been down there trying to get some kind of help and recognition. So I bring this nameless woman of the gospel, who to me is St. Jane Doe. That's what you file when you're filing cases in the church, Jane and John Doe. And she is our patron saint of the survivors that came with me here today, Phil Saviano and Ann Hagan, who are the Boston leaders of our group and have fought this struggle here for many years. The folks from, I have quite a contingency from bishopsaccountability.org who are here today. And of course, most importantly, my twin brother Paul and my wife Patricia. I met Patricia, we've been together 33 years. And I was working in an inner city church, and she was in the gospel choir, and I heard her before I met her. I heard her voice. I call it love at first voice. So let me conclude by talking about Pat, because people say you can't change the past. That's not true. You can. You absolutely can change the past. Love changes the past. Patricia's love for me changed my past. And I am so honored to be here, and thank you so much. And Michael, I think I'm at my 10-minute point, probably.
Peter, for your sermon, thank you. I was definitely preached to today. Thank you. And thanks to all of our honorees for sharing your reflections with us. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present again these honorees. First, Eileen Donahoe. Simone Xavier Guerrand-Hermès. Elizabeth Eaton. Peter Isely. And William Graham. Divinity Dialogues. This is the speaker series hosted by the Alumnae Council. We've had 6 programs now featuring many fascinating alumni sharing their stories. And all of these can be found on the HDS website. We look forward to continuing this program next year, so we hope that you will tune in either on campus or online. And before we close today, not only are we honoring these 5, but this is the concluding event for the chair of the Alumni Council for the 2013-2014 year. And so to Julia, we wanted to say a special thanks for her hard work and for her faithfulness to this leadership council. She has been a member since 2009. And this last year, I think, has been one of our absolute best. And so I would like to invite all of you to honor her with applause and thanks. And we have a gift.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We call this program Divinity Dialogues. That's our official name for it. But of course, any time that people who have been touched by the Harvard Divinity School community, anytime they come together and talk about what matters, or they talk about the world, or they talk about what they love, or who they love, those are also Divinity Dialogues. And they spring up here on Francis Ave. They spring up in coffee shops. They spring up around the world. And so we invite you to be inspired here today, but also to go out to wherever you have come from and continue this conversation about all that matters. And thank you so much for being here today.